The next step in our sketchbook making process will be to create the punched holes that we're going to need along the spine of each one of our signatures of papers. So the one where you created the template on the inside with pencil, where you have the 6 dots that we're going to need for holes. We're going to take that and set the other ones off to the side, and with just a thumbtack push pin, I'm going to first tap and make sure that all of my pages are aligned really neatly and that they're not offset at all. The neater I can do this, the better. And then very, very carefully, using this push pin, holding it at a 45-degree angle. I don't want to poke straight down and I don't want to poke straight across, but just at a 45-degree angle, I'm gonna go right through that hole. And that's gonna poke all the way through to the back side. And if I poke it right at a 45-degree angle, notice it's gonna come back out right on the crease of that last page, just like that. And then I give that a little wiggle, and then I slide down to the next one. Poke all the way through. And I try really hard to not bend or put creases in my paper when I'm doing this, just because you don't want to work on creased paper later. So just very carefully poking right through each one of those holes. And then you can see when I flip this over on the back side, I now have those holes that are going right through the fold crease lines on that little section of pages. Now, since we have measured everything out perfectly on this one page, instead of measuring it for all of our papers, we are going to take this one page out of this first signature. I'm going to take that signature and set it off to the side, grab my next one, open it up, tap and make sure all those pages are aligned nice and neatly, and then put that first page inside of this one as my template. So making sure that everything is nice and lined up, all my papers are folded perfectly together. Now I can go through this little signature and poke my holes for it. I do like to give this a little bit of a wiggle depending on how thick the needle is that we're going to be sewing with. Makes it a little bit easier to go through later when we're sewing these pages together. But now that I have that second one finished, I'm going to pull that template page out again. That one, notice it's perfectly lined up. I'll close it and grab the third one. Open it up to the middle. Lay my template inside and continue. So now that I've finished my last book, my last signature, I am going to take all of my signatures, and I still have this template page. So I'm going to take that template page and go back to my very first signature, which now only has 4, and reinsert that one back to where it's got all of the pages that it needs. And now all of those signatures have their holes poked in them. So if you stack those together, if you've done this correctly, you should see a very nice, neat little series of those holes poked right along the spine of your book. Now that we are ready to go with the sewing portion of this, you are going to need your pages, your sewing needle, and your thread. Now you probably have your thread on a little small bobbin like this, but I want to make sure that you can see what I'm sewing in the video, so I'm going to use a really, really bright thread. That way you can see it pretty easily. I'm going to figure out how much thread I need. And we're going to make 3 arm lengths using the full stretch of your arms, as wide as your arms will go. So holding that tail, I'm going to stretch this out, and I'm opening my arms up as wide as I can, all the way across one arm, all the way across my chest, all the way out to this one. So I now have a super long length of thread. That is 1 arm's length. And then all that thread, I'm going to gently set down and try not to get it tangled. And then I'm going to grab and continue and add a 2nd arm's length, as wide as my arms will go, both arms. Set that thread down. Do that a 3rd time, as wide as my arms will go. And then I'm going to get just a little bit more. I always add just a little bit beyond 3, so maybe about that much more, and cut the end. Now this is a very long piece of thread, and it is very easy to get all of this tangled. So be really gentle with it. I think this works best when you clear off a nice big flat work area where it won't get tangled up in other things. But now holding this end of my thread, I'm going to thread my needle and sort of drop it. And now I'm going to come back to the very beginning and find the beginning end. So now I have the beginning of the thread and the end of the thread. I'm going to hold those 2 pieces together. And now I'm going to make a big knot, like a quadruple knot, to tie off the tail. So just start with those 2 pieces, make a single loop, and go through. And there's a single knot. And then I'm going to do that a whole bunch of times to make this knot really, really big, to make sure it's not going to slide out from the holes that we've just poked in our pages. So there is a triple knot. And each time I'm trying to make sure that that knot lands on the knot to make it bigger and I don't end up with a whole bunch of separate knots. Quadruple. Just make a whole bunch of those here. The bigger this is, the better. I'm gonna do this 6 or 7 times. Okay, so now I have a really big knot and the tail of my thread. And what I'm going to do now is slide my fingers along those 2 pieces of thread that are now together and try to slide that needle down with me, keeping everything untangled, getting that needle basically down to the middle of those 2 pieces of thread. This part of this project is one of the most frustrating things because it's so easy to let the thread get tangled. You could do this with smaller sections, but I try to get it all done, the whole sewing thing done with 1 piece of thread if I can help it. But if it doesn't work out and your thread isn't long enough, you can always tie it off and re-thread your needle and start with another section. But now that's what all of my working thread looks like. So I've got the tail, trying to keep everything laying nice and flat, and I have my working needle at the other end. So once you have your needle threaded, you are going to take one of your signatures and set the rest off to the side. For each signature that we add to our sewing, we're going to start with one and then stack the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and so on until we have all of them stacked and sewn together. But we're going to take that first signature, and I like to hold it to where I can flip easily between the inside and the outside. That makes it a little bit easier to work with as I go. So it doesn't matter which end I start the very first signature on, but I'm just going to start down here because that's comfortable for my hand, and I'm going to start by sewing from the outside of the book into that first hole, poking that needle through to the inside of the book. Now that is very important that you want to do with each and every book that we add on. You should start every book from the outside to the inside. If you ever get to a point where you're sewing from the inside to the outside, you've done something wrong and you probably need to back up and figure out what you've done. But then I'm just going to pull this thread through, and you'll notice you end up getting a lot of tangles like this. Be really careful and just gently pull back on them, and that will sort of straighten that out, and then you can keep going. Don't ever pull a knot tighter than it already is. You want to loosen it, don't tighten it, because then you may not be able to get it undone. And so I'm going to pull that there until now the knot and tail at the end of my thread is pulled all the way through where it's attached there at the end. So now that I'm on the inside with my working thread coming through to the inside of this first section, I'm now going to weave my way out and then back in and back out and in and out all the way to the end of this first book. Now, when you get to the end of your first section, it should end with your thread on the outside, and you should have the knot here with two long sections of thread, and then the thread on the outside. If you open it up to look on the inside, you should have 3 little short dashes of thread, and that tells you you have done that first section correctly. Once this is done, I'm going to close this first section and take my second stack of pages and put it on top. Now, since we started on this end with the first section and wove our way to this end, we're now going to start our second section on this end and weave our way to this end. So we're going to sort of go down and up. Again, holding this book to where I can open it and close it. My first book is completely closed. I don't have to mess with that book again. It's finished. And now, starting on my second section, going from the outside to the inside. And you will notice that by doing that, it now creates what I call a little bridge of thread connecting the first section to the second section. So now that I'm at the end of my second section, notice I have 3 short sections of thread on the inside, and when I open it up to the outside, my section now has the 2 long parts, and now I'm back on this end. Now you can tell that you're doing this correctly if, notice how nicely those threads line up. That means I am good to go, that I have done this correctly. Now when I get to this step, what I like to do is make sure that I don't have any looseness in my book. So notice that bridge right there is rather loose, and I just start at the beginning and tug that thread and work out any looseness up to the end where my working thread is. Now you will notice that this end is connected with that bridge. So those 2 pieces are now secured together. But on this end, those 2 pieces are separate. So we are going to get those attached so our book doesn't fall apart. Now at the very beginning, we had that nice big knot that we tied. So my working thread is down here on this end. I'm gonna take my needle and I'm gonna try to go through or underneath that big knot. And that's a little tricky. It may take you a couple of tries. And there, I've gotten that needle through it, but usually if I can't go through it, I try to go underneath it in between those 2 threads. And it's a little snug, but now if I pull this, what I have just done is create a bridge that now connects that end of my book. So it's now connected on both ends and it won't come apart. Once you have done that, lay those 2 sections down and pick up your 3rd section. I'm gonna stack it on top. Open the 3rd section to where I can see the inside and the outside. My working thread is on this end, so now I'm gonna weave my way in and out, in and out, in and out to the end of this 3rd book. So now I'm at the end of my 3rd section, and notice all my thread is lining up. I can see my 3 sections on the inside of that 3rd part, so that is all correct. And now, what we need to do is we have everything bridged together on this side. All three of those sections are tied together. But notice on this side, the first two are tied together, but the third needs to be connected. So this is really important, and this is the step that you'll follow for the rest of your signatures. So what I'm gonna do, the first two sections are nice and tight, so I'm gonna go back through my third section and pull it really tight, make sure it's secure down there and snug, it doesn't have any looseness. Pull that out. Work out any loose thread, and now it should all be really smooth. Now, what we're gonna do is pick up our working needle, and this part is kind of tricky, so you have to really pay close attention. In order to connect the third section to the first two sections, I have a little bridge connecting 1 to 2. So what I'm gonna do is take my needle and I'm gonna go underneath that bridge and then pull my thread through it. And doing that creates just a single loose little knot where the book 3 is now attached. Now if I let that go, notice how it immediately loosens up. So if we want to tie a knot right here to make sure this all stays tight, this is a good point to do that. So I'm gonna hold all this together and pinch it with one hand. And then I'm gonna go back through that bridge again and come up through that thread. Let's see. I'm gonna pull it almost to where I have a little loop left. I'm gonna take my needle and go through that loop. And I've basically created a little single knot right there. Now once I've gone through that, all those are done. So I'm gonna lay those flat, take my fourth section and stack it on top. Open it up to where I can see the inside and the outside. My working thread is on this end. So now I'm gonna pick up my needle and start my fourth section on this end, weaving in and out, in and out, in and out. So now I'm to the end of my fourth section. I have my 3 short dashes on the inside telling me I've done this correctly. And on the outside, you can see that this fourth section now lines up nicely with the first 3. So what I'm gonna do is pull out the looseness there and sort of tighten this thread up, pinching right here at the top. Now, book 4, the fourth section is attached down here at this end, but it is not attached up here at this end. So we need to connect this section to those previous sections. So we're going to use the same trick we did just a minute ago. We are going to go underneath the previous bridge. So we're on section 4. So I'm going to take my needle and go underneath the bridge between books sections 2 and 3. Go underneath. and pull that thread through. Now that makes a little bridge. Now if I want to pull all that really tight and pinch it, I can tie a knot here if I don't want this to loosen up again. So I'm going to go underneath that bridge again. Pull it almost all the way. Okay, now when I have just a little small loop, I'm going to take my needle and go through it, making a single knot, and pull tight. Now my fourth section is attached to the previous three. Now we're going to do that for the next 2 or 3 sections, however many sections you have left. Once that's complete, lay that part down. Pick up your next section, starting on the correct end, weave in and out. Now that I'm to the end of this section, I'm going to go back through, tighten everything up, make sure I don't have anything loose and that all my thread lays down nice and flat. And now I need to connect this end to those previous sections. So using that same trick again, I'm going to go underneath the previous bridge and create a new bridge connecting this last book. So that connects it. I can pinch that really tight, and if I want to make a single knot, I can to help hold all that in place. So I can go underneath that bridge again. When I have just a little loop left, take my needle, go through the loop, and pull that thread through. That's my fifth section. Now I'll lay it down and stack my next one. Okay, so now I have finished and I've gotten to the end of all of my book sections. So I have those first 5. This end down here is all secured together, but I need to secure this very last section. So again, pull this tight, work out any looseness, make sure that the thread is nice and flat with no kinks or bunched up sections in it. And this time I'm going to go through and tie a big triple knot connecting this last section to the previous sections. So I'm going to go underneath the previous bridge, go underneath, I'm going to go through that loop. That makes a single knot. Pull all that really tight, and then I'm going to do that 2 or 3 more times. Underneath, go through the loop and pull tight. Again. Go through the loop, pull tight, and again. I like to be extra sure that this is all going to be really secure. Go through the loop and pull tight. So now that is a quadruple knot. I'm pretty sure that's not going to go anywhere. And then I'm going to leave about 1 inch of tail and cut off the extra. And that shows you how to finish sewing your book. So now you know you've done this correctly when everything is attached. You don't have sections that are loose and gapping. Everything is attached on this end. Everything is all attached on this end. And you should have nice, neat sections. And then you should be able to open your book section by section and see your 3 short dashes. And that tells you that you have done this correctly. We will leave off with that for today. Tomorrow we're going to be doing some things with our Mod Podge. We're going to be securing all of this edge to seal all of this down and make sure that none of those knots or that sewing will ever come undone. But this sewing is really, really hard. It's time consuming and it is frustrating. So take your time, slow down. If you run into a knot or a tangle, don't panic. Don't pull it tighter, but try to loosen it up, and then that way you can keep going. So that is our tutorial for today.